So this is the rules discussion for Babylon 5, the core game set 2258. It goes with the part 1 was the review and play, and this is the rules that go with that. A game consists of as many rounds as are required for a player to win. Basic game, when the rules refer to the basic game, they're referring to an introductory level of play. The basic game rules are in white, not shaded. Advanced rules are shaded. Standard game. The standard game is a level of play where all the advanced rules, shaded rules, are in effect, and each player uses his own playset. Varying rules are not part of the standard game. Round. A round is once around the table with each player taking a turn. Turn consists of one player performing each of the 5 phases. Record keeping, vote, allocate, move, and fire. Positioning tokens on the map. Tokens are positioned within hexes so that the edges of the tokens are parallel to the edges of the hex. The facing of a ship is the direction of the forward part of the token. A ship facing a base in an adjacent hex is considered to be docked to that base. Only ships can be docked. A squadron base or other non-ship token adjacent to a base is not considered docked. For a ship to be able to build a base in a hex, the ship must be adjacent to and facing the hex. Only ships may be considered in a docked position. Stacking a hex may contain a maximum of 1 unit token, with the exception of squadrons under a carrier, and dormant shadow vessels under a base. War token has a text declaration of war on it. Players may use the war tokens of the Empire found in their Empire control sheet and must use proxies if they run out. Whenever a player fires weapons from any of its tokens at the unit of another player, the firing player must give that player one of his war tokens. If that player does not currently have one, a player who fires his weapons on one of his faction tokens must give out a war token. A player who fires weapons on an opponent token must give out a war token, even though none of his Empire tokens may have fired. Shadow influence tokens, found in the Shadow starter kit. Shadow influence tokens are used to indicate players who have been influenced by the shadows. Vorlon alliance tokens, found in the Vorlon's starter kit. Vorlon alliance tokens are used to indicate players who have allied themselves with the Vorlon Empire. The Babylon 5 dies, it's white die black lettering, most prominently when entering hexes with damage indicators. Defense grid is a special defensive weaponry used by many ships to diminish incoming weapons, fire, or destroy small targets such as mines or fighters. The defense grid die is used when a ship or base is the target of a weapons volley or when a ship sweeps a mine. The text NDG, where it is a number, indicating how many defense grid dice are to be rolled. And then each empire is a unique defense grid die with a appropriate empire colors. Some of the game setup I did the basic setup, then I did advanced rules with that, but for the standard game setup, you select the empire control sheet of the empire you'll use for the game, and then map pieces. Select 5 or more map pieces from your collection. One of these must be the homeworld map piece of the same empire, and here's your empire control sheet. Put extras away. Empire player may not use the Babylon 5 map piece or a homeworld map of another empire. The total value of these pieces may not exceed, found after the name in parentheses, may not exceed 25 points. The homeworld piece counts in this total. Duplicates. Player may not use duplicates of a map piece in a playset. Tokens. Each player may only use generic tokens and the tokens of his empire. However, the ability to use tokens of another empire may be granted on the empire control sheet. The use of factions or certain cards. No proxies. You must have a given token to build it. Cards. Players should have a legal player deck. At this point, remove any empire cards belonging to empires being represented by other players and set them aside. Then a variant is the random game setup. Each player selects an empire. Place the Babylon 5 map piece in the center of the table. Place the homeworld map pieces in their positions. Randomize the rest and deal them face down in the map in a place completing the map so no player has viewed any of the map pieces. Give each player the tokens needed for the empire they represent. Give each player the card displaying the empire they represent. Shuffle the rest of the cards and deal them out. After selecting your hand, extra empire cards are added to the random cards you were dealt from your deck. You may not look at these cards. Play, skip the map creation, proceed to either factions or starting forces. Map creation. So diagrams show the shape of the map to be used based on the number of players to start the game. Experienced players may use any size map they wish, and scenario rules may dictate other sizes. So they figure out who goes first, and then the players take out cards from the other empires from their decks. Babylon 5 homeworlds. Put the Babylon 5 map piece in the center of the table. It's placed face up. If using star kits only, you may not have the Babylon 5 map piece. In this event, Babylon 5 is presumed to be at the location that is not on the map. No player may use the Babylon 5 map piece as one of his starting map pieces. Homeworlds. First player places his homeworld in position 1 shown on the map. Piece is placed face up in a position the player desires. Second player then places his homeworld in position 2 and so on. Placing starting map pieces. Starting the player will go last, then proceeding counterclockwise. Each player places one map piece adjacent to any map piece already on the map. Map pieces are two-sided and are placed face down. CGS will go up. Map pieces may not be placed in an area outside the final map size. Any unplaced map pieces remaining after the map has been completed are set aside unexposed. They are not currently used, but may be used by means of certain cards. Only the owning player may view these pieces during the remainder of the game. Flip Babylon 5. The player places the last map piece. The map flips the Babylon 5 map piece over to its unexposed side, the large Babylon 5 graphic showing. Once placed, the map piece's unexposed side may not be looked at by any player until a unit has entered the map piece, causing it to be exposed. And some advanced rules. Faction tokens. Any empire not being represented by a player may be used as a faction. The Docker faction and Raider faction are also used as factions. Selection. To select a faction, the player chooses one or more tokens from one empire, not represented on another player's control sheet as his faction. Announce. After all players have selected a faction, each player announces his faction and shows the token selected. Auction. Starting with the first player, hold an auction for each faction. The winner of each auction pays for the faction from his reserve as a player who may use the tokens of that faction. These are the only tokens of that faction used in the game, except by means of a card. Duplicate factions. If multiple players have selected the same faction, only bid once, the winner picks one of the configurations. The duplicate factions are not used by any player. Starting forces. Starting hand, each player secretly selects a number of empire cards from the player deck. No duplicates is indicated on the empire control sheet as a starting hand. Shuffle the remainder of your deck. Starting economy, place currency in your 4 scoring banks to represent the amounts currently there. Starting fleet. After the map has been created and players have selected their starting hand, each player places empire-specific bases, is indicated on the empire control sheet. Players in the order of play may then spend any or all of their starting economy reserve to place additional units on their homeworld map piece with any facing desired. Your empire tokens are built using empire discounts. Begin play. Proceed to D-turn sequence and start with a player who had the highest roll. Card usage. Player decks. Each player will have a player deck or starter deck in a basic game and will only draw cards from his own deck. A player deck consists of a core deck plus possibly a selection of other empire cards. Building a core deck. A core deck is the main card selection of a player deck. It must contain at least 10 distinct cards. These cards must be generic or of the empire player Duplication. For every 10 distinct cards in a core deck, you are allowed 1 level of duplication. The level of duplication is the maximum number of distinct cards you may have in the deck. Card types. No more than half of the core deck may be of the same card type, event crew, etc. Other umpire cards. Cards of other umpires do not count as part of the core deck. They are added after the core deck has been completed, making the player deck. In order to play, cards of other umpires represented by other players must be removed from each player's player deck. The level of duplication is determined previously as the maximum number of distinct cards of another umpire that you may have in your player deck. How cards are played. Cards are played during the phase indicating the card. An action is the starting and completion of a step within the phase. Cards are played at any point in the phase before or after other actions. The playing of a card and its resolution is an action. Record keeping phase. No cards are played in this phase. Vote phase. Vote card may be played to call vote. The playing of a vote card through to the completion of the vote is one action. Allocate phase. Each allocation is its own action. Move phase. Each movement of a token and its resolution is an action. Fire phase. Declaration through completion of a volley is an action. OP phase. These cards are played in response to another player's actions taken on the player's turn. OP phase cards are played during the opponent phase during the card. They must be used when played and are resolved just before the action to which they are responding. Your turn. Opponent turn. When played during an opponent's phase or in response to an opponent action on your turn, they must be used when played and are resolved just before the action to which they are responding. Unique cards. Each player may play a maximum of 1 unique card each turn. Duration. Cards of a duration have the duration start and played. Some less number of rounds, turns, phases. They are discarded. Cards which are discarded after use must be used when played and then discarded. Hand size limit. A player may not draw cards from his deck to cause his hand to exceed 7 cards. In an instance where a rule would cause the hand to exceed 7 cards by means of other than drawing, then the hand may exceed 7. Negating card functions. Mandatory functions. A mandatory function equals cannot be negated by a card which negates the function. You can only negate an entire function at the point when it's announced. Game variance and larger maps. This row replaces the previous row of this number. Master's level playset. Use standard playset rules except select map pieces defined here. Quantity. Select 10 or more map pieces from your collection. One of these must be the homeworld map piece and the same empire and use the Empire control sheet, putting extras away. Empire, a player may not use Babylon 5 map piece or homeworld piece of another empire. Total value, the total point value of these pieces may not exceed 50 points. The homeworld map piece counts as total. Duplicates, player may not use duplicates of a map piece in a playset. Master level map creation. Diagrams in these 2 pages show the shape of the map that can be used for a number of players. They're all placed face down, except homeworld and Babylon 5. World territory. If the map has been created and players have bid for factions and selected their starting hand, each player places empire-specific bases on its homeworld map piece. Then each player exposes the 3 map pieces adjacent to the homeworld map piece. These 3 map pieces plus the homeworld make up your homeworld territory. Master's level starting forces. Players in the order of play may then spend any or all of their starting economy reserve to place additional tokens and non-occupied hexes in their homeworld territory. Your empire tokens are built using empire discounts. The starting fleet may consist of ships and/or squadrons. You may also build bases on any of the economy indicators in your homeworld territory without using a ship to build them. Chaotic map at any point in the game. At the instant the exposed map piece has no unit tokens. I don't remove that map piece from the game, from the map, and place an unexposed map piece in its place from a random pile. To further modify it, let each player bring in 5 map pieces plus his homeworld map piece, totaling no more than 30 points total. Stop replacing map pieces after the random pile is gone. Then Mind Warfare. Each time a map piece exposed, make 2 random direction rolls. The results indicate hexes on the outside of the map piece that have mines. Roll 1d5 to determine the size of each mine, and place a mine token of that size in the random hexes. A result of 0 indicates that no mine is placed. In this case, a mine may be placed in a hex that contains a map element. When a mine has been activated by entering its hex, activate the hex after resolving the mine damage. Moon Token Gambit. Each time a map piece is exposed, roll 1dg. If the result is a number other than 0, place the Moon Token with the economy indicator equal to the die result on the map piece. Make a random direction roll with a result indicating in which outside hex of the map piece the moon is placed. In this case, the Moon Token may be placed in a hex that contains a map element and supersedes it. Then Circle of Death for 6+ players. Use the below map for this game variant. Your cards may only affect 5 players. They may not affect other players. Your tokens may only fire weapons at the tokens of these 5 players. When you call a council vote, only these players may vote. To start the game, every third person starts their turn at the same time. Thus, players 1, 4, and 7 will start their first turn simultaneously. When a player finishes the turn, the next player may begin his turn if no player within his borders is currently taking a turn. Victory conditions. Economic victory must be achieved over all the players of the game. Surrender. If a player surrenders during the victory check of his record-keeping phase, and if 8 players or 5 players remain, the turn of the surrendering player is not passed on to the next player, is deleted from the cycle. Turn sequence goes record-keeping phase, vote phase, allocate phase, move phase, fire phase. For the record-keeping phase, victory check, no player may attempt any of the victory conditions on or before his third turn. Economic victory, if you have at least twice the gross economy of each opponent, you may attempt an economic victory by declaring this to the opponents. If at the beginning of your next turn, during this phase, you still qualify for economic victory, then you have won the game. Surrender, if you have a negative net economy, you may surrender at this time, but aren't required to. Move your units, cards, and war tokens from play and yourself from the game. Your map pieces and map element tokens should not be removed until the game is over. In advanced territorial victory, if at the start of your turn your gross economy exceeds the gross economy of each opponent, and 6 or more map pieces are occupied by 1 or more of your units, and are not occupied by any opponent units, you may declare a territorial victory. If at the beginning of your next turn during this phase you still qualify for territorial victory, then you have won the game. For the purposes of this rule, in any game where players bring in a number of map pieces other than the standard minimum of 5, use the minimum number of pieces brought into the game plus 1. Political victory, 4 more players only. If your gross economy exceeds the gross economy of each opponent, you may attempt a political victory by declaring an attempt. 3 vote cards from your discard pile must be removed from the game in order to make this attempt. If at the beginning of your next turn during this phase you still qualify for a political victory, your gross economy exceeds the gross economy of each opponent, then a council vote is taken. If the council vote passes, you've won the game. Opponents may not voluntarily vote no for this council vote. And then basic, generate economy. Your economy reserve is increased by amount equal to your net economy. Click bonuses. Bonuses you have in play are added to your reserve. Freighters and tugs. Freighters and tugs docked to Babylon 5 may give bonuses. Pay penalties. Any penalties affecting you must be paid from the reserve. Map pieces. Some map pieces require to pay a penalty. Shadow influence. Shadow influence penalties are paid to the owner of any shadow influence tokens under your bases. Cards. Some cards generate penalties. Raider penalties are paid to the owner of the Raider tokens docked to your bases. No debt allowed. There are times when a player's economy reserve may not be sufficient to pay a penalty card, etc. In these circumstances, the penalty or debt is ignored after it has reduced the economy reserve to 0. The economy reserve cannot be reduced to negative numbers. Cards of duration. Some cards last for a defined number of rounds. Recover squadrons. Deployed squadrons must be recovered by moving them via squadron movement or jumped under a carrier which has not reached its carrying capacity. This sector of recovering squadron does not activate the carrier's hex, nor does it count as the squadron's moon for this turn. If a squadron cannot be recovered, cripple it or destroy it. Cripple it if undamaged and destroy it if crippled. Discovery of dormant shadow vessels. Any player who has a dormant shadow vessel in his homeworld may attempt to discover it. Record keeping, vote phase and allocate phase. So the record keeping, move gear. Each of your gear cards in play may be relocated once each round at this time, moving it to one of your crew in play. Notes on economy tracking. Currency or dice are used to represent the current amounts in each of your scoring banks. Accumulation. Unused economy in your economy reserve is not lost, remains in your economy reserve until spent. No financing. You cannot do anything that costs more economy than you have in your reserve. Spending. As you perform an action that has a cost, deduct the cost from your economy reserve. Empire control sheet. If an involuntary expense is imposed, if you own a card, you do not have sufficient economy reserve to pay the amount, your reserve is reduced to zero. You're now required to pay the remaining amount. Requirements. In a tournament, all players in the same game must use the same color dice for their first 3 scoring banks. Then vote phase. Council vote. You may call for a council vote by playing a vote card. Read the card aloud and designate the terms of the vote card. Should the vote pass, if you do not wish to call a vote, proceed to the allocate phase. Negotiate. Discussion. Players may freely discuss the vote with each other, making arrangements or bargains they wish. Economy may be exchanged for purchase of another player's votes. Finish negotiating. Take the vote. Agreements. Agreements made here are not binding and are upheld solely by player discretion, except that votes purchased from other players with the bribes economy are immediately binding, and the economy immediately changes hands. This is the only time economy being exchanged between players, unless directed by card or rule. Take the vote. Cast votes in play. Each vote is cast for, against, or abstain. Each player casts a vote clockwise in order to play, with the vote caller first. Cards able to cast votes do so. A crew must be on Babylon 5 to vote, or modify 1. Each ship docked to Babylon 5 casts 1 vote. Modifier votes. All players cast the following modifier votes in any order. Votes can be continually added in this step to sway a decision. Some card functions may modify cast votes. Vote cards may be discarded from the hand, allowing the discarding player to cast 1 vote per vote card discarded. This does not count as playing a card, and there's no cost to do this. No changes once vote has been cast. It may not be changed by the player, except by means of card. Result: if there are more votes for than votes against, the vote card takes effect, otherwise it does not. Allocate phase. So the allocate phase is when you make purchases. Allocations. The following allocations may be done in any order. Subtract economy from your economy reserve as it is spent. Build. You may build 1 or more of your tokens. Repair. Repairs may be conducted. Purchase cards. Cards may be purchased from the top of your deck at a cost of 2 economy per card. Declare a total purchase before drawing any cards. The purchased cards are then added to your hand. A player may not purchase cards in excess of the maximum hand size of 7 cards. Other expenditures. Occasionally other allocations are performed, such as playing cards. Shadow influence and Varian alliances. Shadow influence. Shadow player's turn. The shadow player may attempt to influence 1 or more of the other players. Vorlon alliance. On a Vorlon player's turn, the Vorlon player may attempt to form alliances. Breaking Vorlon alliances. A player involved in a Vorlon alliance may make 1 attempt per base to remove a Vorlon alliance token from the base. Away missions. Crew may change location or perform an away mission. Building tokens. Cost to build your tokens. You may build 1 or more of your tokens by paying the token's build cost from your economy reserve. Empire discounts. When an Empire-specific token builds an Empire-specific token, the build cost is reduced by the amount equal to the upkeep of the token build. Scoring bank adjustments. Your gross economy is increased when you build a token with an economy indicator basis by an amount equal to the economy indicator. Total upkeep. Your total upkeep is raised by an amount equal to the upkeep cost of any token you build, unless the token was built from a scrapyard. Net economy: if your gross economy or total upkeep changes, your net economy is adjusted by the same amount. Building a token: may only build a ship token in unoccupied hex adjacent to one of your bases facing the base, docked. Base token: you may only build a base token in an unoccupied hex which has an economy indicator. The base may only be built if one of your ships is adjacent and facing the hex. The economy indicator on the base token must equal the economy indicator of the hex. Jump gate token: jump gate token may only be built on an exposed map piece which does not currently have a jump gate. Jump gate can only be built in an empty hex directly in front of one of your ships. Squadron token: you may only build a squadron token under a base which is a carrier or under a docked ship which is a carrier. The base is considered the building unit. Additionally, carriers may not exceed their carrying capacity. Squadrons may be built under a ship which is a carrier which was built on the same turn. Mine token: one mine token may be built during the allocate phase. Beach units with mine landing ability. They are placed on a map on an empty hex adjacent to the unit. The hex the mine is built on must be built on an exposed map piece. A maximum of 3 mines and or minefields are allowed on a map piece. Activate hex: ships and bases, not squadrons, activate the hex they're built into. Restrictions on building tokens. Empires: players may not build tokens of empires other than their own empire and the factions they won by bidding in factions. Empire tokens may only build that empire generic. The empire specific tokens of one empire may be build tokens of that empire generic tokens. Generic tokens may be built by any player. Occupied hexes: a token except squadrons cannot be built into an occupied hex. A hex with a unit token. Building while being built: unit may not be used to build or repair a unit in the same phase that it is self-built. Contested hexes: ship or base may not be used to build if it is in a contested hex. Also, token may not be built in a contested hex. Repair: only bases can conduct repairs. When a base is repairing another unit, the base is considered to be conducting repairs, and the unit is considered to be being repaired. You may not conduct repairs to opponent tokens. Cost repair tokens: crippled unit may be repaired by paying the repair cost. When repaired, simply flip the token back to its undamaged side. Conducting repairs to your units. Base repair: crippled base may repair itself. Ship docked: crippled ship may only be repaired if it is docked to one of your bases or to Babylon 5. And there's repair to squadrons. Restrictions on repair: repairing while being built. A unit may not be used to repair or build a unit in the same phase that it itself is built. Contested hexes: a base may not conduct repairs, even to itself if it itself is in a contested hex. A base may not conduct repairs to a unit which is in a contested hex. Contested space: it's unlikely for units to be built and repaired in combat. Free space: if no opponent units are adjacent to a hex, the hex is automatically not contested and is considered free space. Contested hex: hex is considered contested if any player with a ship or base, not squadron, in an adjacent hex desires the hex to be contested. The current player must obtain permission from each player with a ship or base in adjacent hex to build a repair in that hex. Move phase: movement. Each of your ships may make one standard movement during your move phase. Ship movement: each of the following is considered a standard movement for a ship and is represented in the diagram below by one or more arrows. 1 is rotate 60 or 120 without leaving the current hex. 2, move straight forward 1 hex without changing facing. 3, rotate 60 degrees and then move forward 1 hex. 4, move backward 1 hex without changing facing. 5, move forward left and forward right without changing facing. This is referred to as a side slip. In the diagram on the Empire control sheet shows movement options. The hexes with arrows represent the hexes into which ship can move, and the direction of the arrows indicate the facing ship can have when it moves to that hex. Alternative movement: several ships have enhanced movement options and some ships have diminished options. These alternative movement options are defined on the Empire control sheets. No stacking: a unit may not be moved or otherwise placed into a hex that contains another unit, exception squadrons. and dormant shadow vessels. Unit may not be moved or otherwise placed into a hex that contains another unit, and dormant shadow vessels, with the exception of squadrons. There's a stacking limit of 1 unit token per hex. Exposing map pieces. Exploration. A unit entering a hex on an unexposed map piece, the CGS logo showing, causes that piece to be exposed. Flip to the other side. When exposed, the player whose unit is entering the map piece determines which way the map piece will be flipped before viewing the other side. Map pieces are flipped from flat edge to flat edge. This means there are 3 correct ways to flip a map piece. Hex activation. Definition of entering hex. Any action which causes a unit to occupy hex it was not occupying prior to the action. The following are all ways in which a unit enters hex. A unit is built in the hex. A unit is placed in the hex at the start of the game. A unit moves or jumps into the hex. A unit is relocated or placed by a map rule or card into the hex. A unit in an unexposed map piece if it cards. Unit is on an unexposed map piece if it cards when it's exposed. Note on units may not be built into unexposed hexes. Activation of hexes. If a unit enters hex with a map element, the map element is immediately activated and applied as defined on a map piece or in the map elements. Exception: jump gate hex is not activated upon entry. Mines, it's modular. Building mines. Mines are built in the allocate phase. Mine detonation. Any unit entering hex with a mine detonates the mine. When detonated, roll a number of Babylon 5 dice equal to the number shown on the mine's damage indicator. Apply the die total to the unit as damage. A mine token is removed from the map when it is detonated. Mine sweeping. In addition to its movement, each of your ships may attempt to sweep a mine. Jumping into mine hexes. Unlike other damage indicators, when a ship jumps into a mine or minefield hex, it does not sustain double damage. Additional movements. After regular movement, additional movements granted by cards or map pieces must be performed after the unit has made its regular movement or jump. Movement does not include a jump. A card or map piece granting an additional movement does not grant a jump unless the card or map piece specifically says it does. Note about scale. The map is not designed to represent any sort of accurate scale. Represent active locations and points of interest. It could be said that there are millions of hexes in between each hex on the map, and that we took these less interesting hexes out, allowing for only the pertinent ones. Hyperspace jumps. There are 2 ways to enter hyperspace and jump. This is modular. Reappearing some distance away, jump gates and jump engines. Within the CGS, hyperspace jumps are instantaneous and ships do not remain in hyperspace for any period of time. Jump gates. A unit which is in jump gate hex may jump to an unoccupied hex up to 3 hexes away or to an unoccupied jump gate hex up to 2 map pieces away. Jump engines. Any unit equipped with a jump engine may jump to an unoccupied hex up to 3 hexes away. No jump gate is required on either end of the jump. Instantaneous. When a unit jumps, its token is picked up and placed into the unoccupied destination hex, facing the same direction as prior to the jump. A jump is not a movement, it's performed instead of movement. It does not move through the hexes in between, does not activate any of the hexes. It does activate the destination hex. Forward facing. When a ship jumps, it must be made into the forward 60-degree arc, showing the example. Unexposed map pieces. Unit jumping into a hex on an unexposed map piece causes the map piece to be exposed and activates the hex entered. The center hex of the Babylon 5 map piece may not be jumped into even when it is unexposed. Jump damage. When a unit jumps into any hex which has a damage indicator, that unit takes double damage. Roll damage dice and then double the result after all the other modifiers have been applied. Mine tokens and minefield hexes are an exception to this, and only standard damage is taken when jumping into these hexes. Instead of standard movement, a jump takes place instead of a unit's standard movement. A ship can make its standard movement or jump, but not both in the same turn. This also applies to ships that participate in a fleet jump. Note this means that a ship cannot activate jump gate hex on the turn and enter the hex, but it may do so in a subsequent turn. And you are not required to activate a jump gate hex. Fleet jumps. When any unit jumps, any adjacent ships which have not yet moved may jump with a primary jump unit. All ships participating in the fleet jump must be facing in the same direction as the jump. All ships participating in the fleet jump must jump the same direction and distance as the primary jump unit. Additionally, they must remain the same and maintain the same positions relative to each other. Each ship in the fleet jump is jumping, consuming its one movement for the turn. Fire phase. The fire phase is the phase where weapons are fired. Volley sequence. Volleys are declared one at a time and resolved in the following sequence. Declare fire. Declare target. Any token in range with a defense rating. Declare your firing token. Give your war token if a player does not have it. Roll long-range support die. For weapons firing a range of 2+, determine damage from each token. Determine total damage, the sum of each token's fire. Play OP fire. For any phase cards, all cards must be played prior to the DG roll. Opponent rolls defense grid die roll, reduce damage, or attack a squadron. Adjust damage, total if applicable. Apply damage to target if crippled. Flip to crippled side. If destroyed, remove the map. Tokens with upkeep are moved to the scrapyard. Tokens without upkeep are set aside out of play. Volleys may be declared until there are no more weapons to fire eligible targets. Repeat the above as necessary. Weapon types. There are two basic types of weapons, heavy weapons and lasers. They are indicated on the tokens as follows. Heavy weapons, this number in the red. Lasers are yellow. The number indicates how much damage is caused by the weapons on the token. Range, heavy weapons. Heavy weapons have a range of 2 hexes. They may be fired at a target at a range of 1 or 2 hexes. See long-range support die rolls when firing at a range of 2 or greater. Lasers have a range of 1 hex. Firing arcs. Firing arcs are used to determine what directions the token may fire its weapons. Weapons are restricted to firing within the fire direction of the tokens. 6-degree arcs. Each token has 6 sides. Each side faces a different 6-degree arc. Again, the red lines represent the arcs for heavy, yellow for lasers. Declaring a volley. Declaring fire. To fire a weapon volley, you simply declare what tokens are firing weapons at what target. This is done one target at a time in any order you choose. Firing token. Once a token has fired at a target, it cannot fire again in the same turn. Any weapons not in range or arc are lost. A token may only fire at one target per turn. Targeting limit. Once a token has been targeted, it may not be targeted again on the same turn. You cannot add another token, fire later in the fire phase, or fire another volley at that target. Effective volley. Effective weapons fire as damage. The sum of the damage caused by all tokens that fired volleys applied to the designated target as damage. Damage. Sources of damage. Hexes. Damage indicators. When a unit enters the hex of the damage indicator, roll that many Babylon 5 dice and apply the result as damage to the unit. Jump damage. If a unit jumps in a hex of the damage indicator, double the result, as we discussed, unless it's mine. Weapon volley. At the firing player's targeted token, determine the damage applied to the target. Cards. If a card caused damage to a token, apply the damage when the card is resolved. Applying damage. Defense ratings. All units have a defense rating. Only tokens with a defense rating may be damaged. Crippling an undamaged token. If an undamaged token takes damage equal to or greater than its defense rating, it's crippled. Flip the token over to the crippled side. Destroying a crippled token. If a crippled token takes damage equal to or greater than its defense rating, it's destroyed. It's removed from the map. Tokens with upkeep are placed in the scrapyard when destroyed. Destroying an undamaged token. If applied damage is twice the defense rating of the token or more, the token is destroyed and removed from the map. Tokens with upkeep are damaged in the scrapyard, are placed in the scrapyard and destroyed. Insufficient damage. If the damage applied to the token is insufficient, even by 1 point to cripple or destroy a token, then damage causes no harm to the token. Squadron tokens. Fighter squadrons. Squadrons are units. Each squadron token represents a squadron of fighters. Some empires have several types. Carriers are required for building. You may only build your squadron tokens under your dock carriers or your bases with carryability up to the capacity of the carrier. Separate tokens. Squadrons are not considered as belonging to a specific carrier. Under a carrier, they are considered inside the carrier and cannot fire weapons or be targeted. Note the squadron tokens under a carrier do not add any benefit to the carrier token. Carrier capacity. Carriers are tokens with a note carrier N on the token, where N equals the maximum number of squadrons tokens the carriers can carry. Squadron movement. Each of your squadron tokens may move one hex in any direction, or jump if it has a jump engine, or if it is in a jump gate hex. Your squadrons may move from the hex they are in, which may be under carrier. Squadrons may move to an unoccupied hex or to a hex with one of your carriers in it. Note only the squadron movement, because it to move under carrier. Squadrons under carrier which moves remain under the carrier. Carrier operations. Important, the following rules may be deleted. Deployment, squadrons deploy by normal movement or jump, when there's no longer a deployment action. Recovery, squadrons are now recovered during the record keeping phase. Squadrons which are now recovered are crippled or destroyed. And then jumps. A squadron with a jump engine or in a jump gate hex may jump in any direction, even if under a carrier. A squadron may jump as its movement for that turn a maximum of one time on your turn. The movement or jump of a carrier does not count as the movement or jump of the squadrons under it. They are still eligible to move or jump even though they traveled with a carrier. Empire restrictions. Squadrons may only be carried by a carrier of the same empire as a squadron. Damaging squadrons. Generally, squadrons are more maneuverable than ships. Therefore, when entering a hex with a hazard, it can be expected that some of the fighter's squadron navigate the hazard successfully. Additionally, squadrons are more difficult to target with weapons since they actually represent multiple fighters. Applying damage. No matter how much damage is applied to an undamaged squadron, it may only be crippled, not destroyed. Crippled squadrons may then be destroyed or subsequent damage per the standard rules. Note, this means that an undamaged squadron cannot be destroyed by single weapons volley. Carrier damage. If the carrier is crippled, the squadrons under it are not affected at all. If the carrier is destroyed, all squadrons under it are also destroyed. Repairing squadrons. Squadron repair. To repair a crippled squadron, the squadron token must be under one of your carriers, which is a base, or under one of your carriers, which is a ship, and is docked to one of your bases or docked at Babylon 5. Squadron merger. A carrier can merge two identical crippled squadrons currently under the carrier into one undamaged squadron, removing one of the tokens from the map at no cost. This may be done at any time, even when in contested space or not docked to a base. Forced recovery. Unit may force an opponent's squadron to be recovered by entering the hex the squadron is in. The squadron owner must move the squadron under a carrier. This must be done with one movement of the squadron or the squadron is destroyed. Then Empire-specific rules. Rules in this section cover Empire-specific abilities and liabilities, which are only needed when playing the Empire or against the Empire covered in the given rule. So, Shadow Influence. Falling under Shadow Influence, conditional. A Shadow player not playing using Shadow or Faction not a player using Shadows as a faction during his allocation phase may seek to influence other players by asking, "What do you want?" The other player may then select a target of the map. If the player selects a target and the selected target is removed from the map, before the Shadow player seeks to influence another player, the Shadow player places a Shadow Influence token under any base of the player he successfully influenced. Restrictions. Vorlons. The Shadow player may not form an alliance with a player currently allied with the Vorlons, or with a Vorlon player. Limit of influence. A base may not have more than one Shadow Influence token, even if there is more than one Shadow player. Placement of Shadow Influence token. The Shadow player chooses which base is influenced by placing a Shadow Influence token under base. When a Shadow player places a Shadow token, if the Shadow player is a War token, the Shadow player must return the War token. Effects of Shadow Influence. A player with one or more bases which have shadow influence is considered to be under the influence of the shadow player. Shadow targeting restrictions. The shadow player may not fire the tokens of a player under its influence, except the shadow player may fire at any base which has one of his shadow influence tokens. The shadow player may fire at any token adjacent to any of the shadow player's bases. The shadow player may fire at any player's tokens if they have that player's war token. Penalty. A player under shadow influence must pay a penalty of 1 economy for each of his bases with a shadow influence token. This penalty is added to the shadow player's economy reserve when played. A shadow influence token may only be removed by the destruction of the base it is under. In the Vorlon Alliance, forming alliance, voluntary. During the Vorlon's player's allocate phase, the Vorlon player may petition any opponent to form an alliance. If both players agree to a base owned by the opponent, the Vorlon player places a Vorlon Alliance token on the base. A maximum of 1 Vorlon Alliance may be formed on each of the Vorlon player's turns. Restrictions. Shadows. The Vorlon player may not form an alliance with a player currently influenced by a shadow player or with a shadow player. Limit on Vorlon Alliance. A base may not have more than 1 Vorlon Alliance token, even if there is more than 1 Vorlon player. Effects of Shadow Alliance. A player with 1 or more bases which have Vorlon Alliance tokens is considered to be allied with the Vorlon player. Placed a token. Vorlon Technology. A base with Vorlon Alliance token may roll an additional defense grid die roll using a Vorlon defense grid die whenever it is the target of weapons fire. Note the base gets its regular defense grid die roll in addition to the Vorlon defense grid die roll. Restrictions on targeting. A base with a Vorlon Alliance token may not target tokens belonging to the Vorlon player. Removing a Vorlon Alliance token. Eligibility. During the allocate phase, the player involved in a Vorlon Alliance may make 1 attempt to remove a Vorlon Alliance token from each of the bases within the following restrictions. The Vorlon player may attempt to remove any of his Vorlon Alliance tokens if he has a war token with the allied player. The opponent may attempt to remove any Vorlon Alliance token for any of his bases if he has a war token from the Vorlon player. Attempt to remove a Vorlon Alliance token. Make a stat versus stat roll. The base's defense rating versus combat stat of a Vorlon crew card belonging to the Vorlon player, selected by the Vorlon player. A single Vorlon crew may only attempt to resist the removal of Vorlon Alliance token once per turn. If the Vorlon player has no Vorlon crew, or he does not wish to use one of his crew, they have a default stat of 0. Result of the attempt. A success for the player making the attempt to remove the Vorlon Alliance token. If the opponent succeeds by an amount equal to or greater than the Vorlon crew's health stat, the crew, if used, is discarded. If the Vorlon player succeeds, apply the amount by which the Vorlon player succeeded to the base as damage. Destruction. A Vorlon Alliance token is removed if the base is destroyed. Dormant Shadow Vessels. The Shadows hid many of their vessels from the armies of light 1,000 years ago. Pre-game setup. Optional. A shadow player not a player using shadows as a faction, may choose to place Dormant Shadows vessels as part of his starting fleet. Any shadow ship token may be purchased as a Dormant Shadow vessel at a cost of 1/2 the normal build cost of a shadow ship. Placement. Once purchased, a Dormant Shadow vessel is placed on an opponent homeworld map piece underneath an empire placed there by the opponent. A shadow player may place a maximum of 1 Dormant Shadow vessel on each opponent homeworld map piece. Dormant Shadow vessels may not be placed on the Vorlon homeworld map piece. Activation during the game. Dormant Shadow vessels do not function, cost upkeep, move, etc. until activated. They cannot be targeted by weapons fires, card actions, etc. They are treated as if they were not in play until activated. Once activated, they are treated as any ship in play would be. Adjacent Shadow Ship. When the Shadow player moves one of his ships on squadrons into a hex adjacent to a Dormant Shadow vessel, the Dormant Shadow vessel is activated. The Shadow player relocates the ship token to the nearest unoccupied hex of his choice with a facing his choice. Discovery. Any player who has a Dormant Shadow vessel on his homeworld map piece may roll 1 Babylon 5 die during the record keeping phase. If the result of the die roll is a 5, then the player has activated the Dormant Shadow vessel. The discovering player notices the ship in the nearest unoccupied hex of his choice with a facing of his choice. Note if there is more than 1 Dormant Shadow vessel in his homeworld piece, A roll may be made for each. Destruction of the base. If the base is destroyed prior to the activation of the dormant shadow vessel, the dormant shadow vessel is removed from the map. Upkeep. If a dormant shadow vessel is activated, it is no longer dormant. The shadow player is then required to pay upkeep on the shadow vessel and use it normally. And telepaths versus shadow ships. Telepaths have the ability to freeze or stall a shadow vessel for short periods of time. A telepath is a crew card with a size stat. Attempt to freeze a shadow ship. And any player with a telepath in play may make one attempt for each of his turns to freeze a shadow ship during the allocate phase. Stat versus stat roll. If you have a unit adjacent to a shadow ship, you may make a stat versus stat roll, size stat of 1 of your telepath versus the upkeep of the shadow ship. If the roll is successful, the shadow ship has been frozen. Restrictions. Shadow influence. A player influenced by a shadow player may not use telepaths to freeze that shadow player's ships. Effect of being frozen. If the attempt was successful, the player controlling the shadow ship selects one of the following restrictions. Movement. The affected shadow ship may not move or jump unless the telepath player for the ship consents to the movement. They may, however, participate in a fleet jump without consent. Weapons fire. The affected shadow ship may not fire weapons unless the telepath player follows the ship, consents to the weapons fire. Vorlon Planet Decimation Modular. The Vorlons eventually choose to eliminate shadow influenced by eliminating the worlds corrupted by shadows. Procedure. The Vorlon Planet Killers may fire heavy weapons at any unoccupied hex with an economy indicator. If the heavy weapons damage from the planet killer is twice the economy damage of the hex, place an asteroid token of the hex. The damage indicator of the asteroid should be equal to the value of the economy indicator. Place a 5 asteroid in the wolf hex if it is decimated. The asteroid token supersedes the economy indicator. Then die rolls. Long range support die rolls. Procedure. When firing at long range to or more hexes, weapons suffer diminished effects. When one or more of your tokens is firing weapons at a range of 2, roll Babylon 5 die, 1d5 for each weapons type on the token doing so. The result of the die is the maximum amount of damage the weapon type of that token may score on the target this volley. This adjustment is made before any other modifiers are applied. At range 3 or greater, use 1 defense grid die, 1dg, instead of 1b5. Note long range support die rolls can increase the damage caused by weapons. The damage remains the same or be reduced. Long range support die roll only sets the maximum for that token's weapon damage in range 2 or greater. Defense grid die rolls. When a ship or base is the target of a weapon's volley, the controlling player may choose to fire its defense grid, the incoming volley, or at a squadron participating in the volley. Each empire has its own unique color-coded defense grid die versus and defense grid die roll versus a weapon volley. All ships and bases have defensive systems used to diminish the incoming damage of an opponent's weapons volley. When one of your ships or bases in a squadron is targeted by a weapons volley, roll 1dg and subtract the result from the volley before applying damage. If a unit is not controlled by any player, it automatically selects to diminish damage. And then modular versus defense grid die rolls versus an attacking squadron modular. When a weapons volley consists of weapons from one or more squadrons, the defending player may choose to firing its defensive grid at one of the squadrons instead of subtracting the die result from the volley. This is done by declaring intent before rolling the die. The result is applied to the squadron's damage. If the squadron is crippled by damage, use the weapons on the crippled side of the squadron token when totaling the total damage of volley. If the squadron is destroyed, do not include its damage when totaling the damage of volley. And stat rolls. Stat roll is simply a requirement that you roll a crew stat or less on a standard 6-sided die. The card rule calling for the stat roll will specify the stat to be used and any modifier to be applied to the stat. Stat versus stat rolls. Some cards or rules call for a stat versus stat roll. The procedure. 1d6 is rolled for each side, and the indicated stat or other number, upkeep, etc., to the side's die roll. The higher score wins. A tie indicates that neither side wins. Order. The first stat listed is a stat the active player uses. The second stat is a stat used by the other side. No stat shown. If a crew does not have a specific stat, that crew's rating in the stat is considered to be 0. This does not mean it cannot attempt to roll, only that it has a lower chance of success than a crew with a higher stat. And then random detection rolls. When a card map piece or roll calls for a random direction roll, simply roll a 1d6 and use the direction roll as shown on the Babylon 5 map piece. Minesweeping rolls. Minesweeping is done by declaring that a ship is sweeping a mine directly in front of it and rolling a defense grid die, DG. The mine is detonated and the ship may take damage. Subtract the defense grid die result from the mine's damage indicator and roll that many Babylon 5 dice as damage. Score the result as damage to the sweeping ship and remove the mine token. Then crew locations and away missions. This section describes how to track locations of crew. When a crew is played, it must be assigned a location by the player playing the crew. Location is a ship, base, or squadron. When played, the crew's location must be any unit which is owned by the player playing the crew. Links, triangular shaped currency with letters in them, are used to link the crew card to its location on the map. Links are not required for crew played to Babylon 5 till such time as the crew leaves Babylon 5. And that's crew locations modular. Transportation modular. All locations are considered to have transporters. Transportation consists of life pods, shuttlecraft, etc. Transportation has a range of 0 to 1 hex. To use transportation, simply declare in the allocation phase that a crew is using transportation to move or perform an away mission. Changing location. To change location, the new location must be in range of the transportation, 0 1 hex, and must not be controlled by an opponent. You can move a crew to one of your ships, bases, or squadrons. When a crew leaves a location, another simply move the link to the new location, showing that the crew has changed location. Crew are assumed to be on Babylon 5 unless the link shows them to be elsewhere. The link can be removed from any crew changing location to Babylon 5. Location capacity. There are no limits to the number of crew at a location. Simultaneous use. When transportation is used in the allocate phase, it can be, but it's not required to be, used by one or more crew simultaneously. You can send 3 crew on 3 different away missions to different locations, or you can send all 3 crew on the same away mission, or a combination. Away missions are performed one at a time, and the crew going on the away mission are all declared when the away mission is declared. Crew must be at the same location in order to go on the same away mission. Emergency evacuation. When a location is destroyed, crew and any abilities or gear at that location may use transportation to evacuate the location just prior to being destroyed. If there are no locations in range to change the location to, then the crew is discarded and location is removed from play by the standard rules. Away missions procedure. An away mission consists of transportation to another location, the attempt to complete the action, mission card, crew function, etc., and transportation back to the previous location of the crew. No links do not need to be moved to perform an away mission, since crew will be returning to the original location after the actions have been resolved. Crew proximity. For crew to affect another crew with a crew function, including gear and ability cards, or via mission card, both crew must be in the same location. Change the location or away mission. Each of your crew may go on one away mission on your turn, or may change location once on your turn, not both. Timing of crew functions and mission card attempts. Each crew may perform its periodic functions once in your turn, may attempt one mission card once in your turn during the allocate phase. These may be done in any order desired, before, during, or after the use of transportation. These may also be performed without transportation. Note, if a mission card were played to the above crew before transported, the crew could attempt the mission card on the opponent ship as well as using its gear function. And the appendices talks about the different, component, products, etc. But special token rolls. Some tokens have short special rules which are defined for the detail. Carrier. A token that has a carrier may carry squadrons up to its limit found. A token with the rule mines can build one mine each round on your turn. It's +2 if docked to P5. This indicates that when the token is docked to Babylon 5, the controller player gets a bonus of 2 economy during its record keeping phase. That can be like, +1 or 3, etc. Can destroy planets indicates that shipment can destroy economy indicator X's. Steal 1 when docked. This indicates that when the token is docked to an opponent base, the base controller pays a penalty of 1 economy, or 2 or 3, etc. during its record keeping phase. The controller of stealing token adds this economy to his economy reserve when the penalty is paid.